In the quiet countryside of North Yorkshire, England, stood an old manor known as Millfield House. Built in the late 1800s, it had once been a proud estate filled with music and laughter. But after a mysterious fire in 1943 that claimed the lives of an entire family, the house was left abandoned for decades. Locals whispered that something inside refused to die, that the walls themselves remembered. In 1979, the Parker family, like a couple, Helen and David, and their teenage son Mark, moved into Millfield House unaware of its dark history. The property was offered at an unbelievably low price, and the family believed they'd stumbled upon a miracle. But almost immediately after settling in, strange things began to happen. Doors creaked open by themselves. The sound of footsteps echoed in the halls when no one was there. One night, Mark swore he saw a woman standing at the end of his bed, pale, burned, and weeping. The next morning, black handprints appeared on his window. At first, Helen dismissed it all as imagination or old house noises. But as the days passed, the hauntings grew violent, and the family realized they were not alone. Something ancient and furious had awakened in Millfield House, and it wanted them gone. This is their story, the true haunting of Millfield House, documented through witness reports, police statements, and recordings that were later sealed away by investigators. The Parkers arrived at Millfield House on a gray October afternoon. The sky hung low, and the wind carried the faint smell of rain. Helen stepped out of the car first, clutching her coat tighter around her shoulders. The house loomed before them, tall, silent, and weathered. Windows like dark eyes stared down at them, as if watching their every move. Mark, their 16-year-old son, was the first to break the silence. "It looks haunted," he joked nervously. David laughed it off, pretending not to notice the sudden chill that passed between them. Inside, the air felt heavy, stale, as though it hadn't been breathed in for decades. Dust motes danced in the fading light as they unpacked boxes and explored room by room. The creak of old floorboards echoed through the empty halls. In the grand dining room, Helen found a charred patch of wood near the fireplace, an odd reminder of the fire that had once destroyed the family who lived there. That night, they decided to sleep in the main bedroom together, since the other rooms were still cold and unfurnished. The wind howled outside, and the old house groaned with every gust. Around midnight, Mark stirred awake. He could hear faint footsteps, soft, deliberate, coming from the hallway. "Dad?" he whispered, but David was fast asleep. The footsteps stopped right outside their door. Then came a slow, dragging sound, as if something heavy was being pulled across the floor. Mark held his breath, clutching his blanket. The doorknob trembled slightly, then stopped. Moments later, the faint smell of smoke filled the room, and just before he drifted into uneasy sleep, Mark thought he heard a woman's voice whisper near his ear, "Why are you in my house?" The next morning, the Parker family tried to shake off the unsettling feeling from the night before. Sunlight streamed weakly through the tall windows, but it did little to warm the cold air that hung in the house. Helen busied herself unpacking boxes while David inspected the plumbing in the basement. Mark, curious about the footsteps he'd heard, wandered upstairs. He opened one of the smaller bedrooms, dusty, dim, and lined with antique furniture covered by white sheets. In the corner stood a large, ornate mirror, its golden frame cracked and dull with age. Something about it drew him closer. As he wiped away a layer of dust, his reflection shimmered strangely. For a second, he thought he saw someone standing behind him, a woman in old-fashioned clothing, her face pale and expression unreadable. He spun around. The room was empty. When he looked back, the mirror showed only his own reflection again, but there were faint handprints smudged across the glass. "Helen!" David called from downstairs, startling him. Mark stepped away, his pulse quickening. Later that evening, while Helen unpacked dishes, she heard a soft humming. It was low and melodic, a woman's voice echoing faintly from upstairs. Thinking it was Mark playing a prank, she followed the sound. The melody grew louder near the same room with the mirror. She opened the door slowly. The humming stopped instantly. For a moment, the air felt icy, pressing against her skin. The mirror reflected her face, and behind her stood a dark silhouette of a woman in black. Helen froze. When she turned around, no one was there. But when she looked back, the figure in the mirror still hadn't disappeared. And this time, It was smiling. That night, the house seemed to breathe. Every gust of wind, every creak of the wooden floors sounded alive. Whispering, sighing, watching. Mark couldn't sleep. The image of the woman in the mirror burned in his mind. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling when he heard it again. A faint whisper, like someone speaking just beyond the wall. He sat up, heart racing. "Mom?" He called out softly. No answer. The whisper came again, clearer this time. A woman's voice murmuring words he couldn't understand. He pressed his ear to the wall. The voice sounded desperate, pleading. Then it turned sharp, almost angry, followed by a low, guttural growl that sent him scrambling out of bed. Downstairs, Helen and David were awake too. The kitchen lights flickered violently, the bulbs buzzing as if under pressure. Dishes rattled in the cupboards. "It's just old wiring," David said, though his voice trembled. But then, from deep within the house, they heard knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks echoing through the walls. Mark rushed downstairs. "It's her!" he shouted. "The woman in the mirror. She's in the walls." Before David could respond, the knocking turned into pounding, as if something was trying to break free from behind the plaster. A hairline crack split across the wall near the hallway mirror. Helen grabbed Mark's arm. "We're leaving," she said, but the front door slammed shut on its own with a deafening bang. The whispers rose again, now all around them, coming from every wall, every corner. Among the chaos, a single word emerged clearly, drawn out hollow and cold. "Stay." The lights went out, and in that pitch darkness something laughed. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the curtains, doing little to wash away the dread that had settled overnight. Helen clutched her coffee cup with trembling hands, while Mark stared silently at the wall where the pounding had come from. The crack from last night had deepened, jagged and unnatural, like the house itself was wounded. David, determined to find a rational explanation, fetched his tools. "It's probably rats or bad insulation," he muttered. But when he struck the wall with a hammer, it sounded hollow. Confused, he chipped away at the plaster. Beneath it, he found something unexpected. A wooden door, small and covered in dust, sealed shut by nails that looked decades old. Helen's voice broke the silence. Why would anyone wall off a door? David pried the nails free, and as the final one came loose, a cold wind blew through the room, though no windows were open. The smell of decay wafted out, a mix of damp wood and something far worse. They shone a flashlight inside. A narrow staircase spiraled downward into darkness. The air grew heavy, and Mark felt a pressure in his chest as though something below was aware of them, and waiting. "Don't," Helen whispered, gripping David's arm. "Please don't go down there." But curiosity outweighed fear. David descended, each step groaning beneath him. The light flickered over peeling wallpaper, rusted nails, and old children's drawings, stick figures with hollow eyes. Then, at the bottom, David froze. His flashlight beam stopped on a rotting wooden chair. Strapped to it was a worn doll, its face cracked and smiling. On the wall behind it, written in something dark and dried, were the words, "She never left." David stood frozen in the basement, his flashlight trembling as its beam lingered on the doll's cracked porcelain face. The silence was unbearable. So still it seemed the entire house was holding its breath. Then faintly he heard it in a whisper, soft, broken, and close. "Don't look at her." He spun around, but the voice vanished into the dark corners. His heart pounded. The air was cold, unnaturally cold, and his breath came out in small clouds. He turned back toward the chair, but now the doll's head was turned slightly, its glassy eyes gleaming directly at him. David stumbled backward, shouting for Helen and Mark. When they rushed down, the light flickered violently. Once, twice, and the bulb shattered, plunging them into darkness. Helen screamed as something brushed against her leg, small and quick, like a child running past. Mark's flashlight flickered on again, and in its beam they saw the doll now lying on the floor, arms spread wide, staring upward. Helen's voice trembled. We should have never opened that wall." David wanted to agree, but his eyes caught something new. Small handprints smeared on the wall in black soot, leading from the chair to the stairs. They scrambled up. desperate to escape the basement's suffocating air. As David turned to shut the hidden door, he froze. Standing just beyond the threshold, half shadowed in the dark, was a small figure. The outline of a girl, motionless, watching him. Her eyes glowed faintly like dying embers. The door slammed shut on its own. From behind it came the sound of soft, childish laughter, echoing through the walls of the house. That night, no one in the house could sleep. The creaks and groans of the old structure had turned into whispers, faint and childlike. Helen lay awake, clutching her blanket as footsteps padded softly across the hallway outside her room. Light, deliberate, and far too small to be David's or Mark's. She sat up, calling out, "Mark? Is that you?" No response, just the quiet sound of breathing near her door. When she reached for the lamp, the bulb flickered and died. In the faint moonlight, Helen could see the door slowly creak open. A cold handprint appeared on the inside, a child's hand pressed flat against the wood. She screamed and the print vanished instantly. David rushed in, flashlight in hand. What happened? Helen pointed toward the door, but before she could answer, they both heard it again. A low giggle coming from inside the walls. The sound drifted behind them, moving swiftly along the plaster, as though something or someone was crawling inside the narrow spaces of the house. They followed the noise into Mark's room. He was sitting upright, pale and shaking, pointing to the vent near his bed. "She was whispering to me," he stammered. "She said her name is Annabelle. She wants her room back." David knelt by the vent, shining his flashlight inside. A pair of tiny eyes reflected the beam, bright and unblinking. Then came a soft hiss and dust blew into his face as the thing inside scurried away, deeper into the wall. The whispers returned, this time clearer. A child's voice, distant but distinct. "You took my home. Now I'll take yours." The house grew impossibly still after midnight. The air felt thick, pressing against their lungs as the family huddled together in the living room. David had locked every door and window, though deep down he knew locks meant nothing to whatever haunted them. The fire flickered weakly, casting long, shifting shadows across the walls. Helen clutched Mark tightly. "We should leave," she whispered. "We can't stay another night." But David shook his head. "We can't run from this. If we go, she might follow us." The sound came again, a faint scratching traveling from one wall to another. It was methodical, rhythmic, like fingernails dragging through wood. Mark buried his face in his mother's shoulder. Then from the far corner of the room, a whisper echoed. "Don't go!" It was unmistakably a child's voice, soft yet filled with something ancient, sorrow and rage intertwined. The lights flickered violently, and suddenly the family portrait above the fireplace crashed to the floor, the glass shattering across the rug. When Helen looked down, her breath caught. The photograph beneath the shattered glass had changed. Their faces were scratched out, replaced by the faint outline of a small girl's shadow standing among them. David lunged for the photo, but before he could reach it, the fire roared to life, flames shooting up the chimney as the walls seemed to shudder. The whispers multiplied, dozens of them, all chanting at once, overlapping and indistinct, but one word clear enough to make their blood run cold. "Stay." The chandelier above them began to sway violently. Mark screamed as a gust of freezing wind blew through the room, extinguishing the fire instantly. And then came silence, a suffocating, dreadful silence that felt alive. By dawn, the house was silent again. The family sat motionless, exhausted, haunted by the whispers that had followed them through the night. But Mark looked different. He hadn't spoken since sunrise. His usually bright eyes were dull and distant, and he sat in his chair staring blankly at the wall, the same wall where the hidden door once was. Helen touched his shoulder gently. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" Mark turned slowly, his voice hollow. "She says you shouldn't have broken the door." Helen froze. "Who says that?" Mark's lips curled into a small, unnatural smile. "Annabelle." David felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Mark, stop it." "This isn't funny." But Mark only tilted his head, whispering in a voice that wasn't his, softer, breathier, like the echo of a child speaking through him. "You let her out. She wants to play now." Suddenly, the temperature dropped again. The lights dimmed to a faint, sickly glow. Helen backed away as the boy's small hands clenched tightly, his fingernails digging into the armrest of the chair until the wood cracked. "Mark, look at me!" David shouted. The boy's head snapped up violently, his pupils dilated. Then in a blink, he screamed. Not a normal scream, but one that carried through the entire house, vibrating the walls. Objects flew from shelves, the curtains whipped like they were caught in a storm, and the smell of burning filled the air. When it stopped, Mark collapsed forward, gasping for breath. The family rushed to him, but before Helen could speak, the boy's trembling voice whispered, "She's inside now." And somewhere behind them, the faint sound of footsteps echoed, heading upstairs. The sound of the footsteps upstairs sent chills down Helen's spine. Each creak of the old floorboard seemed deliberate, slow, patient, waiting. Mark lay unconscious on the couch, his skin clammy and pale. David grabbed the flashlight and whispered, "We end this tonight." Helen shook her head, terrified. "No, David, whatever that thing is, it wants us up there." But he didn't listen. Gripping the flashlight tightly, he began climbing the stairs, each step groaning under his weight. The air grew colder the higher he went, thick with the smell of damp wood and decay. When he reached the landing, he saw that the door to the attic, the one that had always been locked, now stood slightly open. He pushed it wider. Dust swirled in the beam of his light. The attic was empty except for old furniture draped in white sheets, boxes stacked high, and a child's wooden crib sitting in the corner. On the wall above the crib were faint, childish drawings. Stick figures of a girl, a house, and something tall and dark standing beside her. Helen appeared behind him, clutching a candle. "This place, it's colder than before," she whispered. Suddenly, the candle flickered violently and a soft humming began. The same nursery tune they'd heard on the radio days before. The sound came from the crib. David slowly approached and pulled back the dusty cloth covering it. Inside was the same cracked doll from the basement, its head tilted, eyes staring blankly. The humming stopped. Then, from behind them, a small voice said, "You found my room." The attic door slammed shut. The flashlight went out, and in the darkness they heard the sound of something climbing out of the crib. The attic plunged into darkness. Helen clutched David's arm, trembling as cold air swirled around them. The faint creak of the floorboards signaled movement, small, deliberate steps circling them. Then came the child's voice again, closer this time, almost whispering into Helen's ear. "Why did you take my home?" David flicked the flashlight, and for a split second, the beam illuminated a little girl's figure standing beside the crib. Her dress was tattered, her hair tangled, and her eyes hollow voids that seemed to absorb the light. He froze. "Annabelle," he breathed. The girl tilted her head, smiling faintly. "You shouldn't have opened the door. Now it's open for everyone." Suddenly, the attic walls began to shudder, dust falling from the rafters. The humming returned, louder, joined by whispers coming from all around them. The temperature plummeted as the door behind them slammed shut again, trapping them inside. Helen screamed as the doll from the crib lifted into the air, spinning slowly before crashing to the ground, its porcelain face shattering, the pieces scattered across the floor. And from the broken fragments, black smoke began to seep, swirling like living mist. The shape of the girl twisted, her form distorting until it became something inhuman. Tall, shadow-like, her voice layered and deep. "This is my house," it growled. "You'll never leave." David grabbed Helen's hand and pulled her toward the door, kicking it open with all his strength. As they stumbled down the stairs, a violent wind chased them, slamming furniture aside. They burst through the front door into the cold night air, but behind them the house groaned almost, laughing. When they looked back, the attic window glowed faintly, and a small silhouette waved from within.